In this video, we're going to go over the effects of relative distance on the amount of depth of field in your image and why our brains tend to really prefer images with shallow depth of field. So to do this, we're going to actually do an exercise with our finger and our eyes instead of our camera, because actually the same optics that are at play in our camera are at play in our own eyes. So what you're going to do is just merely bring up your index finger in front of your face. You'll note that as you bring it close, there's a certain point at which you cannot focus on it. This is the same thing as your camera lens in that it has a certain minimum focal length distance that it can do, that anything closer, it's not going to actually be able to focus on it. So your eyes are the same way. So bring it to a point that you can still focus on it, but very close to your face. Look at your finger. Note how it's nicely in focus, and then become aware without shifting your view of how blurry the background is. Do you notice it's extremely blurry? You really can barely make out anything in the background. Now shift your focus to the background. Now note, does your finger even look like a finger anymore? It's probably barely even there in your view. Now take your finger and move it further out to the full length of your arm. Focus on your finger. Become aware of that background. What do we end up seeing? The background at this point ends up looking like, while it's not perfectly in focus, we can make out what the different objects are behind there. If you become aware of the background again, just consciously aware of your finger but not focusing on your finger, you will still be able to see it's a finger. It's not just a total blur as it was before. This is because the relative distance from your finger, or your subject in that case if you're doing a photograph, to the lens is a different distance there, to the relative distance to your background. The shorter that distance is from your subject to your object, the blurrier that background is going to look, because of different complicated optics principles that are at play that we needn't go into here. Just know that the effect exists. So this also explains why when we take portraits that we tend to naturally gravitate to those pictures that have nice blurry backgrounds and have what we call shallow depth of field. It's because this is the way we naturally see the world. When we look around and say we're having a discussion with someone and they're standing in front of us, we'll see that they are in focus, but that the background will be somewhat out of focus. This is the way our brain determines depth perception there. That if it's that it sees everything in focus, it just assumes it's exactly in the same plane of focus there. So when you go ahead and take a picture of somebody and say there's something that it looks like there's growing out of their head and it's sharply in focus, your brain is literally interpreting it as, well, that object must be literally growing out of that person's head because it's in the exact same plane there. Versus if it was very shallow depth of field there and it was blurry behind it, your brain would know that whatever was that object behind there is not actually attached and growing out of the person's head. So that's overall why we tend to find them to be more pleasing or artistic when we look at a photo that has a person or an object and that we're focusing on it and then the background is out of focus.